Once again for Catalog and Cocktails. It's your honest, no BS, non salesy conversation about enterprise data management with tasty beverages in hand. I'm Tim Gasper, longtime data nerd, product guy at Data.World, joined by Juan Cicada. Hey, Juan.
Hey, Tim, it is Wednesday, middle of the week. We're live, end of your day with our drinks in hand, and we're going to have a fantastic, honest, no BS conversation today. I'm really excited about our guest, Olga Maydanchik, who's a data management practitioner, somebody who I met, if you all remember, I was going around the country doing all these honest, no BS dinners. And some of the beauty of that, I'm just so lucky, is that I get to meet so many amazing data leaders. And Olga was somebody who I met in Chicago, and we've just always been in contact. And something that I've seen Olga just in the last definitely last year, she has just been making all these posts, all this content on LinkedIn, which is just taking all these basic concepts and which people make them so freaking complicated and kind of distilling this stuff. And let's take it back to the basics. And that's what we're chatting about today. Let me stop. Olga, how are you doing? Thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. Doing great.
All right. Well, let's kick it off and let's do our tell and toast. So, what are we drinking and what are we toasting for today?
Well, I'm a tea drinker, so that's my cup, which is actually misleading. Some people think that I don't drink tea in it, but it is a tea. And what I'm drinking today, it's blood orange from Adagio tea. So, really good.
All right.
Really
Well,
good.
I'm going to go that I am also having somewhat of a tea. I'm calling this an Earl Martini. So it's a Earl tea infused gin, which a friend of mine gave me. And then has a little bit. So it's gin and vermouth and a little bit of Texas honey syrup, shaken, not stirred. Look at that. Even have a fancy martini glass.
That
I
looks
went
nice.
today. Tim, what about you?
I'm also doing gin. I've got a little botanist gin going on. And I have a grapefruit rosemary gin cocktail. And pretty tasty. Yeah.
There
So,
you go.
what are we cheersing to?
Let's go back to the basics.
Back to the basics. All right.
Cheers, cheers. So talk about back to the basics. Our warm-up question is, what is something that we do too complicated in life, and we should just go back to the basics about it?
Everything. We complicate pretty much everything. And sometimes we plan the trip and then we think too much about it and then complicate or create new application and we decide to make it super complex. So even the decisions where to go to restaurants sometimes are pretty hard.
Yeah, I have to say, like that's a good one. Like, I'm trying to figure out. We're like Tim and I are going to be in London next week, and we're like, oh, let's go meet up with people. I'm like, okay, where's a great place to go in? I'm like, too complicated. How about I just ask the people who know? Where do you suggest to go? And they're like, go to this place. Perfect. That's where we're going. Very simple. That's the basics. Let's ask somebody.
There is a show over there, the play that went wrong or something like that. And it's one of the theaters. Guys, you got to go because I literally had a belly laugh for 2 hours by watching it. It was that good.
Oh, you'll have to tell us about it.
All right. Well, I always love the arcade. And by the way, for folks who are listening, yeah, Tim and I are going to be in London next week, and I'll post something so we can hang out with folks next week.
We'll do a little happy hour or something like that. Probably Thursday, right?
Yep.
All right. Spreadsheet about London. We talked about it, right?
Yeah. No, you're a big travel and organizing. We'll talk about organizing and stuff. All right, back to the basics. So what's the deal with business glossaries, and how do we make it so complicated, and why don't we start? What's the basics behind business glossaries?
Unfortunately, we don't make it at all. In majority of organization, it simply doesn't exist. And the first time companies are thinking about business glossary only if they buy data catalog, and then it's a little feature in a data catalog. So typically companies don't think about it. They don't even know the word business glossary. They do have some kind of like a spreadsheet with some kind of terms that they are using. Usually it's data analytics that keep the list of metrics that they are using in their reports, but they don't think about it. So
Interesting. So, obviously, Data.world is a catalog company, and a lot of catalogs do have glossaries in them. But it is interesting to see how a lot of times when folks are implementing catalogs, it's almost like it's the first time they're really trying to get organized on some of their terms. But they've had, SharePoint and wikis and things like that. But a lot of times I feel like people don't think to actually create real definitions around things. I guess what's your feeling on why organizations don't focus on this? Why is this something that's not at the forefront?
well, I think first of all, I don't think that business people think that it's important, because their attitude is, hey, we've been running our business and making money for the last like 10, 15, 20 years without your glossary. So why would we create one? IT would think, hey, we've been doing our pipelines and applications for the last like 20, 30, 40 years, and we've been doing fine without your glossary, so we don't need one. So until organization has some kind of a data team, whether it's chief data office or just enterprise data management, or somehow whatever the name, that's why I say it's data people, the term business glossary doesn't come up whatsoever. So
Yeah.
What is the answer to that? Yeah.
what is the question?
No, answer to like, oh, we've been running the business without one, the pipelines without one. Like, so what? Like, what? Let's go into like the motivation of why you should be doing this. What are you losing by not doing it?
Yes. So a while ago, everybody wanted to be data driven, right? What does it mean being data driven? Is relying on data to make the decisions rather than on a gut feeling. And I believe there was a survey somewhere where they say that like 70% of decisions are made with the gut feeling rather than with the data, right? So, but the thing is, if you don't know what data in an enterprise is available for you, how can you make data decisions, right? If you just don't even know what to use in your decision, that's one thing. Now everybody is talking about being AI ready, right? It's a new sexy thing, but how can you be AI ready if you don't really know what to use to train your AI with, right? Or basically not only what data you have, but how those data are connected to each other. What are the relationship between this data? Because AI is all about relationships, right? It's all about, go there and this concept is connected to this concept, et cetera, et cetera. If you don't have it, then guess what? You'll be behind. You will be behind.
So my interpretation of this, which is actually the argument I make too, is like, look, yeah, you've been working on this stuff and it's working. Your business is growing. It's fine. But but it may mean that you're probably not growing more. Like you could be growing more. You can be growing faster. You're leaving things on the table. And your competitors who actually are probably doing the same, let's say, but those who actually start realizing, oh, let me go invest more in the semantics and stuff and actually start with the basics, they're most probably going to start kind of speeding up and then catching up or doing more. So I guess the argument is that you're leaving money on the table.
You will, yes. And the other thing is even not just even growing, but getting the bigger margin, the profit margin is also important, right? Because you literally need to know, like, let's say if you're retail, what sells, what doesn't, right? So if you don't have something to back it up, the data, right, how would you know exactly what merchandise to order, right, from your suppliers, what to display, how to display, which shelves to display, right? Which store actually should carry each particular merchandise and everything, right? That's all in the data, right? So,
Where should you start if you want to do a glossary? Like, is there, certain types of things that an organization should focus on first if they're trying to tackle this?
yes. So first of all, you have to start with the definition. And you have to explain to people what business glossary is. By the way, it's just a collection of terms, metrics, and their definitions, right? And the relationship between each other. But then you would start saying, oh, but we already have it. It's called data dictionary. And then you have to explain people that no, glossary is not what the data dictionary is. There is a difference. They are connected, but those are the different things, right? So, and usually like glossary is something could be in your spreadsheet, and data dictionary, it could be within your database or also in some kind of spreadsheet. It doesn't really matter, but those are different things. One is just concepts, general, or what I call logical data elements. The other one is about physical columns and everything. So this education is tremendously important because people wouldn't even understand what exactly are you trying to build. So definition number one. Second thing, you need to go around and literally create a 30 seconds sentence that explains you why you need a data glossary. And it's actually, you don't want to start with the list of bullet points. Oh yeah, because you want to get better decision or better, integrity, or, provide foundation for kind of starting semantic modeling exercises. Definitely not that, right? So you want to have something down to your sentence. Why do you need to have it? And unfortunately or fortunately, this sentence has to be created based on a specific enterprise, right? You cannot have a general answer. So for example, in one company where I worked at, they appointed a new CIO, and he came and he wanted to modernize, the whole stack. And his first question was, what data do we have and where they are located? Schemas, everything, give me everything. He got this answer 2 months later. So, and the team of people working on it. And by the way, he didn't get the complete answers. He get like half of the story. But the point is, why do you need the glossary? If you would have it, the answer would be ready in 60 seconds. So in some other enterprise, it could be a completely different story. You have to come up and just find the points, the pain points, I'd say, or whatever it is, find something that resonates. And then again, I could go on and on and on, but there is a structural procedure. What do you do about glossary? How you do it, after like basically where you explain what is it and why is it, then you have to go to specifics. And, we could talk more about that later. So.
Well, I want to continue on those specifics, but just to recap, I think it's important getting the terminology straight, right? The business glossaries and the data dictionaries people may have. The data dictionaries are describing the technical natures of things, right? Your tables and columns. The business glossary are the main concepts, and you want to start relating these things such that when someone's looking for something about a concept, like the concept can be related to multiple things, right? So it's that findability, searchability improves around things. Yeah, but how's next? Like, how are we starting this from an organization who, let's say, has a mess, right? Let's call it they have data dictionaries spread around. They may have business glossaries or some places spread around. Like, what's your recommendation on how to start?
And who is starting? Like, does it start with the technical team? Like, should they pick a thing that shows up in their dashboards, and should they define that, or should it be coming more from the business?
Okay, so in different organizations, it's completely different, and I've been fortunate or unfortunate enough to work in many of them and implement the same thing in different ways. So you have to have several friends with the organization. So first of all, data architecture, first and foremost. If there is a data architecture practice in the company, they are your friends, because they are especially if they are trying to implement something called data mesh or something like that, then because they're already thinking about domains, subdomains, etc. And we are going to talk about that later. But those are the people, number one, friends. Second friends are your data modelers. So if the company have data modeling practice, especially the ones who are creating enterprise data model, then you definitely want to go there. I'm not even going to mention ontologist or something, because if we are talking about data glossary, that means we don't have an ontology, right? So a third thing, what you probably want to do is you want to get a hand of presentation, some PowerPoint presentation from the higher, like, or mid-level management, who are trying to report what they've done over the last, I don't know, quarter or something like that. Because one particular thing you want to do is to get the right lingo, right? If they are naming this data something like participant data, you don't want to name them anywhere else, right? You want to refer them to the same way as business or other groups are referring to. So those probably would be the starting point. I think the analytical department's probably the best because they are the one who have everything and everything. So they do have stashes of those spreadsheets. So somehow you kind of like need to make friends with them. And I guess you literally need to go from department to department and try to identify what I say data owners, because to me, when you create the glossary, at the same time, you have to assign ownership, accountability, and responsibility. So you basically created a term, put it in a glossary, don't put it in a glossary unless there is a name associated with that. So to me, it's kind of an iterative process that involves a lot of people. So
Yeah,
Okay, so
that makes a lot of sense. The ownership piece, I think, is really important. Otherwise, somebody might just stick it in your glossary, and then nobody's maintaining it, nobody's thinking about it. If you have questions about it, who do you even ask, right?
yeah,
yeah.
this process that you're describing, who is that person doing that, and where do they sit, and what department are they doing? And
Typically, as I said, data people, chances are it's either the enterprise data team or data stewardship team or, chief data office or something like that. I don't think that unless you have it, I don't think anyone would want to spend time on it. Probably data modelers could be, but data modelers don't think about data in a business term. So it is not literally business glossary. Sometimes they think about it more in how to organize data. So they think about things in entities and attributes, which is not really business glossary, but so yeah.
okay,
The data champion, it has to be somewhere again, data governance function, stewardship function, something like that. Yes.
all right. So let's continue to this, because I think, as I mentioned, I want this to be kind of the step-to-step guide of people listening. So by the way, I really love this is a great insight. It's like, go find those PowerPoint presentations that are being used and presented to kind of upper management, because you're seeing right there the lingo, right? That's a really key insight. And it's right there in front of you, right?
Yeah, and for example, like or even let's say there is a new application coming out, right? So business is making this application, and when they usually it is iterative process, right? Today application can do feature 1 to 3, and tomorrow whatever it is. So listen how they're thinking about those features, and the features could be, yeah, we are allowing participant to be enrolled in something in the policies on the online. So here it is, participant, policy, enrollment. All of a sudden, those are the words that should be in the business glossary. So that's basically how it is. So if you go down, then okay, the next step would be literally to decide what elements of your data glossary you need, right? So you have business terms, then you might have metrics, and you might have KPIs. Now, you might want to say, hey, I just want to name everything business terms. Or you might want to say, okay, I want to do those business terms and metrics. Then you might say, oh no, I need to do metrics and KPIs. So the more variety you have, the more troubles you're asking for. And let me explain you. So for example, if I tell you something like administrative transaction fee, is transaction fee a business term or a metric? Because it is calculated based on certain things, right? There is a formula, mathematical. So the question is, it could be interpreted both ways. So, and then there are all those lengthy discussions that actually doesn't mean anything. They are not bringing us closer to the, end game, but nevertheless, they happens. So to me, you just need to figure out and instruct other people what to do in those scenarios. Hey, if you have the situation like that, just slap something and just move forward, right? We are not thinking about perfection. We are thinking about progress. Or the other thing that you can say, hey, what should I include in business glossary? And then I've seen glossaries that have a business term date, which is basically describes, which is specific point in time expressed in, month, DD. Do you really want to have that in your glossary? I'd say no, but I've seen people include it, or that they have a definition, person. Well, it's a human, whatever, however it is. Do you really want to do it or not? So you also need to figure, you're not the only one, right? You have to do some kind of an education and instruction to your team what to do in certain situations. So literally, don't include the word human, don't include the word date, something like that, right? Don't include the word trade, which is exchange of good. Now, so you want to include something that you somehow want to trace to the data themselves, right? So that's kind of like number one. The second thing, you don't want to have a glossary which is list of thousands of or tens of thousands word, because that's like the worst, probably the worst way to create the alphabetical glossary, right? So somehow you want to organize it, because if person is looking for something, for example, I am looking for manufacturing location, the person kind of sort of should know, yeah, probably if I click on a manufacturing domain, maybe I'll get there. You don't want to click on a, HR domain, because, it's like a common sense. So the second thing, you want to figure out what are your domains and subdomains. That's actually probably the hardest thing to do. And because domain is actually the word that has so many meanings. Again, you have to go around and explain people what domains are and why you want to, separate things into the domain. If you see that they don't understand you, then just tell them, hey, just you need to be able to search and find something. That's the only way I think about it, just an organization, right? So same like how you organize your closet in with your clothes or anything else, right? How you
Put your
organize
coats with your coats and your shirts with your shirts. Right?
Exactly. You have your like junk drawer, you have everything else. So again, this is like kind of simple, don't overcomplicate it. So then you create domain subdomain, right? And that's actually, it's not as easy, because again, if you have data architecture team who has data mesh implementation started, do you really want to be exactly in line with them? Are domains of your glossary should be exactly as domains as over there? Yes or no, right? So you have to somehow figure out how it will work. And my theoretical standpoint is we probably should try to be as consistent as possible. But if they are creating something that you think not really going to work for you or for your business people or for your possible users, then probably do something different. Example, data modelers, they like the word party, right? And they organize data because it's a party data or the product data, right? Go to any
Party and agents, I feel like.
exactly, right? And then the party could be person or organization, right? And then there would be party roles. So
Sorry, I love it because you know what? I've seen this over and over again, and it annoys me, but I've never had the opportunity to chat with somebody to say like, oh, like really, this kind of makes so generic, but you see it all over the place.
yeah. Same thing for products, right? You just dump everything in a product. And trust me, I've seen MDM implementation where there would be product, like let's say insurance policies and everything, and funds in the same place, because they are also products, right? It's really different. But anyway, so creating domains and subdomains is not as simple. My guiding point is kind of, okay, just do something. It's not like you're not building it out of stone or bricks. You can change it later, right? Because it's just a glossary. and you will refine it, etc. Just do something and just move on, right? If it doesn't make any sense, you'll correct it. The only thing what you want to do is to stick the ownership again, because unless you put the ownership in somebody's name, it's never going to be good enough. You wouldn't be able to use it. The other thing is, probably don't put the name of a team over there. Like it's not analytical team who is an owner. It's actually Tim Gasper is an owner. That's an important thing, because otherwise, I came from socialist country where we didn't own anything. It was owned collectively, and that means something that's owned collectively is not taken care of, right?
If everyone owns it, nobody owns it.
Yes. So you do it, and then you literally create those terms, right? Terms, definitions, or metrics, but that's not it, right? The important thing is you do want to create relationships between glossary terms, between each other, or between metrics and something. So for example, this acronym, this like ABC is an acronym for this particular term, right? So that the people should kind of search for ABC and for the term and find what they are looking for, right? You want to do synonyms, you want to do, I don't know, variant, or like something described by. So there is a list of relationships that typically in Excel you wouldn't be able to do that. It's too complex. You do need a catalog for that. And typically a vendor provides something out of the box relationships. Sometimes they don't even have it. Like you just ask your customer success team, hey, do you have it? And then they'll produce some kind of a spreadsheet. And then I implemented so many catalogs probably a dozen. And every time I see this list of relationships provided by a vendor, I usually puzzled for a day or two, because some of them don't make sense. But it doesn't mean that they are wrong. What it does mean that I have to go to the vendor and ask them to provide me an example. What do they mean when they are creating this relationship, right? So, and you have to connect those concepts together. You have to, especially metrics, right? For metrics, you want to connect them to the data points or other metrics, how it was calculated, because it's really important for data quality. It's important for PII data. It's important for data standards and everything, right? So you literally have to go about, and when you populate your glossary, one thing you need to do, how this glossary is literally relate different parts of the glossary, how it's relate with each other, right? So that's the thing. Now, once you have your glossary, you want to connect it to the technical part, to your tables, to your columns, etc., right? And again, this is something you can do manually, which is of course non-sustainable, but majority of data catalogs provide this capability. It's either called linking, association, tagging, name doesn't matter, right? But the idea is you saying, hey, what data do I have in a company? And you say, hey, I have policy information. Where is this data physically located? And then through this association, you can say, hey, it's located in the schema, database, etc. Now, once you do that and you press the button in a catalog and it produces those association, then you need to establish the process of curation. Curation meaning, because the tool, I haven't seen the tool that does that automatically correctly. So you have to go and manually delete incorrect associations and probably add some of the correct ones. Hopefully the tool has some kind of a machine learning algorithm that basically, based on the feedback that you provide, next time it's going to associate something better and better. But tools are different. So that's it. And the glossary, think about glossary, it's kind of like a spider in the middle of a web, right? Where it connects all different parts. So it's also like, if you think about, hey, there is a policies, then you need to apply, let's say, PII policy on your data. That's exactly the point. You are relate your terms to the policy, because then basically you say, hey, my term is applicable to the employee birth date, and employee birth date is term. So if you want to create data standards, that's like, again, the glossary is a perfect place, because you're saying, hey, my that's, let's say, employee birthday, and you could create your standard, or sometimes you could create business rule, basically that every employee must have a birth date. You're not talking about physical things, right? You're talking about logical. And again, you can use this associations between business rules and business terms to create your automatically data quality rules, which basically you can execute against your data, et cetera, et cetera. So it is a iterative process, which has actually become very, very complex because there is so many connections between different parts of different things you could do, right? So
Yeah, I mean, it can be pretty broad, and now you're starting to get into some of the edges of glossary here, I feel like, which, by the way, Juan and I were always taking notes, and we also looked on back channel as well, and we're both basically saying this is an epic rant that you're going through here because it's very much like the evolution of how you end up tackling these glossaries, and then questions lead to more questions, and you mentioned, well, don't start with ontology. But what's funny is that as you went through that process, you started to run into ontology. It's like you couldn't avoid it, right?
I can't.
Because now you have to think about hierarchy. You got to think about relationships. You have to
Yes.
think about taxonomy and domains and subdomains, right?
Yes, yes. Frankly, glossaries to me is the simplest version of ontology or whatever it is. You can think of it as a controlled vocabulary per se, or kind of like precursor to that. Yes, and
It's
all
like
those
it's the beginning
relationships.
of it, right?
Yes, it's a beginning of it. Then you can talk about connecting, creating your knowledge graphs. Then you can talk about thinking how your AI model will be consuming your graphs, etc. But somebody got to do this like very low, dirty work of figuring things out. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. What about you know, policies? Do you see policies as something that people often include as part of the glossary as well, or do you see that as something a little bit different?
Yes and no. Typically, policies are very misunderstood, but majority of data catalogs are providing place to have policies. I remember it took me a while to figure out what do I do with these features that catalog vendors are providing. I'd say you probably want to do that, um, because sometimes it's kind of like it might be useful, it might not be useful. Let me give you an example. Let's say you have a person's name term, and then you have person's preferred name term. And you can have a policy basically, hey, for legal documents, don't use preferred name term, but use this term, right? It's a policy, it's organizational policy. I mean, let's go to privacy. Hey, for example, the policy could be none of the PII data should trickle to your BI tools, because BI tools really don't benefit from having information about email addresses or names or anything like that, right? That's not what BI is tools for. But that's not true, right? In real life. So you could create the glossary, you could basically attach it to all your PII elements, and through your lineage, literally many catalogs have lineage. Now we haven't talked about that yet, right? You will see that, hey, all my PIIs are trickling down to, let's say, whatever the BI platform you're using. So that's another case where everything is connected. So I'd say do the policies probably.
All right, so probably yes, but make sure that
Probably.
it's really the right thing for your use cases.
Mhm.
What about before I actually do want to broaden the conversation a little bit beyond glossary. I know we've kind of stuck on glossary for a little bit, but I think there's a lot there. There's a ton of meat there, right? Is What about governing the glossary, right? Like, are you do you believe that there should be like a governance council, and how often do they get involved in things like the glossary, or or is that one step too tactical? Like, really, you have more of like a glossary stewardship kind of user group or something like that. I guess I won't cede you too much here. Like, what do you think about like governing the glossary?
Honestly, it's different in different organizations. So within the organization with the mature stewardship practice, I'd say you just want to assign the domain of data to a steward, and steward would be the one who will be responsible for making sure that all those definitions are right. And when I say steward, I am not just talking abstract steward. I'm talking about Olga Maydanchik steward, right? I am the one who is responsible. What I found that business people typically don't like coming to the meetings where they discuss this term, and unfortunately, they often delegate this task to their offshore implementation teams who absolutely don't know anything about the business, and they just use chat GPTs and everything like that. So it is important not just to slap somebody's name as an accountable name for the term, but actually do talk to this person and inform him that his name is on it, and make sure that he does review it. And once he has his name on it, then I found that majority of people do like to review it. I don't think anyone likes to review it in a like big group. Many people literally prefer to do it, in a good company of themselves. But it's so I haven't seen successful meetings where the whole council is governing the tools and everything. It's good in theory. The theory is solid. I just don't think the practice is
I
good.
think I agree with you. I think that whether it's our customers or other companies trying to have sort of like working councils, like a working group council, like it can get really messy. It's much better, it seems like, if the council is more like they reviewed a potential decision,
Mhm.
everybody gets together and they say, "Yep, we approve." Right? It's more of an approval function than a working
Mhm.
group.
Yeah, no, I
Delegation
find
tends to
it's
be better.
much better to work on one-on-one, but it got to be at least one glossary champion in a company who would
Yeah.
bring all those pieces together. Because as soon as something, is lose you, like this person goes on vacation for 2 months or something, or 2 weeks, doesn't matter the time, it's not going to be done. So you constantly have to tend. It's like a garden, right? You have to water it, you have to weed it out, etc.
So, one thing I want to go into, because first of all, this was exactly what I was hoping this episode was going to be. Was like, let's go walk through all the steps, and I think we can, like, you've really defined what to do, what not to do, what goes first, second, and so forth.
By the way, I'm not done yet.
Okay, well then I was going to ask you something that you said before, which I wanted to dive into, which was like
Yeah.
creating the data quality rules and stuff. But continue. Where do you want to keep going?
Okay, so you need to get into the whole classification thing, right? That's the other one. So you do want to classify your data into something, in some kind of buckets. And there is no one classification, there are many of them. Same thing as you can classify, things by color or by size or by weight. So same way you classify it now. You want to classify something on a logical business term level and then trickle down those classification down below. Or sometimes you need to classify things on a physical level because they are different. Why classification is important to me? If you want to create some kind of data quality rules, it's not sustainable to create them manually. You do want to figure out how to make semantic data quality rules. Let me explain you what I mean. Let's say the rule is every employee must have a hire date. We are talking about business term employee and business term hire date. So they gotta be like whatever employee, what defines employee ID, for example, right? And a hire date. And this is the rule. And from that, it doesn't really matter whether your data are in HR database or in a health insurance database or in Facebook or whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. You can create instances of the data quality rules, the executable ones, the ones that produce errors, the ones that say, hey, the error is in the row number 33 of this particular table. So without glossary, you literally can't get there. You will be forced to create separate data quality rules for every single data element that you are using. So we are talking about automation, uh, you know, of a magnitude. So for example, now there are so many different classification issues because, vendors usually provide very simple classification like passport or driver license or, something like that, right? Which is easy, credit card numbers. But you do want to create classification in accordance to your data domains, to accordance to your business glossary, because again, you want to have a bright strokes somehow. So for example, you want to say, hey, my PII policy applies to this group of data, or my security policy applies to this group of data. So if you haven't classified it, if you haven't tagged it that, hey, it belongs in this box, you literally can't literally apply the policy in the big strokes. Also, we haven't talked about unstructured data. So that's actually the whole another realm, right? How to classify your documents. Again, the techniques are completely different, but you do want to classify your unstructured documents in accordance to your business glossary, because domains and data mentions within this document must be also connected to your structural world. So typically classification is one of the hardest one, and it's probably one of the most interesting ones, because there are opportunity for machine learning, for many other ways, because you just don't want to classify it by like based on a column name or based on something. You do want to go somewhere within the data and look how the column looks like. Actually, one of my friends, he used to had a catalog name Waterline Data long time ago.
Really
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, Alex Karelik, yes. And he invented the term column fingerprinting or something like that. Basically, he was saying same way as how we have, unique fingerprints, the same way the column has exactly unique kind of like characteristics. So if you find the data within some kind of column, even if the column named XYZ, you still could figure out that this data, I don't know, policy number data or social security number or something like that. Yeah. So anyway, the classification is probably one of the most interesting aspects of that. But again,
What else? What else is there more to go through on this
Like,
whole? And the reason I'm asking is because I'm super in love with everything we're doing, but there's also I told you we can talk for hours about this
well,
stuff.
let's talk about, okay, the next thing what you should do is, if you're serious about it, you have to figure out where your data kind of like exist in terms of consumption, not just tables and columns for storage, but how it is consumed. So for example, if you have a metric and your metric is, I don't know, whatever, cost of goods sold, something like that, right? You want to know which particular reports utilize this metric. So there is a whole connection of the metrics with those reporting, the whole analytical thing. So why do you want to do it? Because if, let's say, you change your systems somehow, you change your pipelines, everything that can go wrong will go wrong. So somehow you want to check that your metric across all of those reports is still valid, right? So that's kind of like number one thing you want to do. The second thing is, especially in the big enterprises, everybody is looking for data. Literally, sometimes I just think about army of analysts looking for data. And let's say you're a huge retail shop. Like when I say huge, we are talking about like billions of items, etc. And there are people responsible for those items and how they are sold, etc. So they are looking for things that are like, where I don't know, where can I find some kind of like store information, where can I find names information, where can I find information about the freight numbers, where can I find this and this. So they kind of like constantly going and looking and looking and looking. Now they find this data, and typically it's a huge table, especially like very flattened out, or it's many tables that you need to connect. So not only you found data, then now what? You don't know how to use it. You need to have some kind of an examples, how to correctly set up filters, how to correctly create joins, right? Because sometimes you find data, and if you do something incorrectly, you actually produce very wrong result. So what I think the good glossary should contain, it should contain examples of queries, how those data are utilized. So for example, let's say this is the metric, that's how it's calculated, and you can trace it to particular one of your approved, let's say data lake, your approved data stores, and say, hey, for example, this is the metric, how it's used, so this is how it's calculated. Because people are not good at creating SQL queries, but they are pretty good at altering them. So if you give them several examples, they get the idea. If you don't give them any examples, God knows what the result will be.
You know what, you just gave such a, call it a very simple, somewhat maybe obvious example, but you know what? People don't even do that, and I will say that the most mature customers that I've worked with, and I mean we have, they have that done.
Mhm.
They find the data, find it, here are all these examples, documentation around this stuff, and other folks who are trying to go do so much stuff like they don't even have that basic stuff in there, right? And
It's not even documentation. To me, it's actually a query catalog for all practical purposes, same as a data catalog. You have to have a catalog of queries, because not only you have to have those queries existing somewhere, you also want people to search for them. So somehow you want to describe those queries, what those queries are doing, and create some kind of a mechanism how people would see. So for example, you want to see, okay, cost of goods sold, again, show me all the available queries, that utilize that, so you could see some examples from different data sets, etc. So this is like very useful, I'd say. So that's what the whole cataloging is about to me.
woo,
I want to ask you one more thing before we go to lightning. What else, in addition to glossary, would you say is like a basic? Like if you like you mentioned a little bit data quality, a little bit lineage. Like if you like, is there anything else where you're like, if you say like you want to be data driven, you got to stick to the basics. What other basics should people be thinking about?
Well, I don't want to talk about data quality rules per se. To me, there is no point of creating data quality rule if you're not doing anything with the errors that your rule found. So to me, the basics are not even writing the programs. To me, the basics are, hey, let's create an organizational structure where I'll find the errors and let's do something about that, right? Whether it will be manually checking them or something like that, or whether it will be automatic correction or, something. So imagine I worked a lot in financial companies, and people who are entering data, bank tellers, trade, executor and everything, they do just the minimum amount of data that's required to execute this trade. Now, many, many, many steps later, you realize that you don't have this data for analytics or this data, etc. Those are missing data, right? So you can create data quality rule. Now, what do you want to do about that? Do you want to go back to the trader and ask them, how to correct it, etc.? So to me, the basics are actually setting up the processes of how you correct your data, because if you don't have those processes, no point. You can create like thousands of rules with literally zero result. So those are the basics.
I love that.
And education, to me also, unfortunately, many people who have a degree in computer science, they come to work and they don't know pretty much anything. They don't know what the database is and what is it, because there is no such thing as data management in terms of bachelor education. So basics are, let's just teach people something. So
okay, time to go to our lightning round, but I'm looking at the question and I have one. Okay, I'm gonna stick another question in here before we go to lightning round. Um, give us your rant on data contracts right now.
I don't have a rant on data contracts. I actually think that they are great. The only thing is, I think that this is something that we've done for years and years and years. And we used to call it service level agreements or data quality service level agreements, etc. It's the same idea where if you get something which is not up to your standards, you just send it back and get whatever you want to. So I think it's great. And unfortunately, I think in the past, we lived in a very simple world where majority of data movements happened through ETL, something like that. So it was very, very simple. So I think the contracts are really useful for the more complex data architecture that we have right now, whatever the definition of a data contract. And there are, I believe, like only two people who are champions.
Well, I'm going to give a shout out to one of our upcoming guests, Jean-Georges Perron, who I spent this weekend with him talking a lot about it. That's why it's very fresh in my mind. All right. We can keep talking. I really do want to keep about this, but we're short on time. So lightning round questions. I got the first one. What should be your first business glossary tool? Is it a spreadsheet?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. That's what I thought the answer was. I was hoping. I just want to make sure it's clear to everybody. Keep it.
Start with spreadsheet, but as soon as you need to set up relationships and everything, you just can't.
Yeah.
Spreadsheet's the best to start.
So second question, should anyone be able to contribute to the company's glossary?
Yes. And actually, majority of data catalogs have something called like workflows created. Granted, now that's my rant. These workflows are so inconvenient to use. So whatever the vendors, please hear me out. It's inconvenient. Yes. And everybody should be able to propose a term. And again, gotta be this some kind of like an approval process. Now, to me, if you propose it, you are it. You.
It's a great. If you propose it, you're it.
So.
Next question. You mentioned semantic data quality, right? You're talking about like defining the terms in the business glossaries, and then that gets kind of compiled down. What are the technologies that you're seeing that do this?
None. I personally created fairly simple data quality rule engine that used metadata to fire up the rules. And you can do it several different ways. So for example, I mean, many of us familiar with those SQL queries where you supply the parameters, right? And depending, like basically select count where something is null, and you supply what's the table name, what's the column name, etc. So this is a metadata driven data quality rule based on very technical things, right? I already gave you an example of find all the instances where employee doesn't have a hire date or employee doesn't have a birth date. So unfortunately, I don't think that those tools exist, but hopefully they will pop up. But they are not that difficult to do, actually, because once you have a glossary, it's just metadata, it's just maps. So even if vendors wouldn't do it, it's not something that a rocket science, any team could implement that.
Interesting. All right. Fourth and final lightning round question. If somebody, if a company buys a catalog, where should you start? Should you start with collecting the metadata? Like, let's crawl all the metadata, or should you start with building your glossary if you have to pick one of those two?
Neither. I'd say usually data catalogs are bought, and there is a very tiny team that's responsible for its implementation. And it may be like one or two people, and then there would be some kind of implementation partners offshore who would be fairly technically adept, meaning they would know which buttons to press on a catalog. And unfortunately, the people who are responsible for the catalog delivery, they don't really know all the possibilities that the catalog could provide, not this particular catalog, but in general. What is it about? How do you do it? So I'd say the first thing to do is to educate yourself what is possible and create a plan. What are you going to tackle first, etc. So
Educate yourself and make a plan.
and educate like vendor agnostic, industry agnostic. I didn't say train yourself. I say educate yourself. So
I love that.
Olga, I
Great.
truly appreciate your your you have represented the essence of what is honest, of what is no BS, and what is non-salesy. So thank you very much.
thank you.
Tim, takeaway time. Take us away with takeaway.
Oh man, I love your direct and very helpful and prescriptive style here, because I think it's bringing a lot of clarity to a topic that I think it's honestly very easy to bullshit about. And so I really feel like you gave us some clarity and some tactics here. And so, we said, okay, back to basics, right? You want to be data driven. You want to try to drive AI. We said that one of the most important basics is your glossary, building out your glossary. Most companies don't make a glossary, or if they do, it's happening very haphazardly, right? Maybe the data team has a couple spreadsheets they've got going on, or maybe it's showing up in the footnotes of a PowerPoint presentation to explain what the chart means, right? And really, you can just start with a spreadsheet, right? You can start simple. And look at what other parts of the company are, what they're doing. Do they have some of these definitions already? Start to aggregate that together. And really just start with simple definitions, right? You don't need to get really complicated. I mean, later you said, you might want to have different types of terms, metrics, KPIs. We got into policies a little bit. You might want to have policies.
Start with terms.
Yeah, just start with terms, right? Start with definitions. And create a 30-second sentence on why you need a business glossary, right? Don't make it about the technical reasons. It needs to be specific to your enterprise. It can't be general. It needs to be specific to your enterprise and connect, the business side to the technical. And you need to have friends, right? So if you're going to be tackling the glossary, look at the data architecture team, look at the data modelers, who's doing the analytics, who's the data leaders and the middle managers. Go department to department, start to find your owners, right? You're actually starting to build out sort of a concept of your domains and your data stewards as you kind of do that, right? Mm-hmm. And don't obsess about perfection. Think about progress. I love that quote. I think that was very good. And the more types you create, you said, the more trouble you create for yourself. So do the minimum viable, even though you do have to create a glossary for your glossary, I feel like there's a meta aspect to what you end up having to tackle here. Don't obsess about it, right? Because you can get probably too pedantic about how you organize all that. But as you do start to grow out that glossary, right, you will have to organize it. And so that's where things like domains become important. That's where things like taxonomies or tagging become important. And make sure that you have ownership around your different glossary terms. Don't put the name of a team. And this is actually, I'm going to make a little bit of a side note here. That's a best practice that we have to start recommending to our customers, because actually a lot of our customers put teams as the owners of things, and you need to put individuals because of the accountability, right? So I think that's a really good takeaway there. Oh my gosh, so much more. But Juan, what are your takeaways, Juan?
On that part, it's like if everybody is accountable, then nobody's accountable. So I think that's something very explicit around that. Okay, so we'll continue. Great. You got your business term, you got your business glossary. You want to start creating relationships between them, acronyms, terms, synonyms, variants, right? And start identifying where there are things that may be related to PII. Then continue, create your technical relationships and do that curation. You can obviously do this manually, but that's not sustainable. And so there's these tools or ways to do this automatically, but you need to have a process to review it and be able to delete the wrong ones, add the current ones. And actually, this is still a lot of work. I mean, not all the vendors and tools do this very well. Think about from there business rules that are going to be done in terms of those business terms, right? So that's how you create these data quality rules. But once if you think about it, the business glossary is kind of the first step. Then from there, right, you start getting into the rest of the semantics conversation, right? You have these controlled vocabularies. You start getting to these semantics issues. That's how you know you're getting to more of these ontologies, and that's how you start getting to your knowledge graph. And then that's how you start getting into more providing that context for your AI. So, but guess what? If you want to be AI driven, how does that start? Business glossaries. Talked about policies. Are they kind of part of the glossary or not? Yes and no. We were talking about like, hey, in the BI tool, should PII be there? Probably not. So there's some policies that you should start defining. We talked about governing the glossaries, right? We mentioned assign the domain of the data to the steward and let them be responsible for it. Don't outsource this because the outsourcing teams don't know the business, right? And when it comes to like governing and reviewing these terms, people like to review them. I like this in the good company of themselves because hey, working group councils can be messy and they should just be more of an approval function. But you definitely make sure that you have a champion for the glossaries. It's like you need to constantly tend to the garden. You need to water that garden. Then we get into classifications. We need to put data into different buckets and classify logical, physical. And why? Well, because things like data quality rules, that's how you apply them, right? For example, you started saying an employee must have a hire date. Those are defined in terms of the business glossary terms, and it doesn't matter where that data is. You can start to find those business quality rules in terms of the business glossary, and then you can actually start automating those rules down to each system. Because otherwise, you can realize I'm going to go manually create rules for each system. That's not going to scale either. And if you don't categorize the data, you don't know where to apply these business glossary terms, these data quality terms. Unstructured data, yep, you got to relate that also to business glossaries. And then once you have that, you need to understand where your data exists. I mean, it's about how is it being consumed, right? If you have metrics, you have cogs and stuff like that, like you want to understand where that report is being used. So it's in a way, it's like understanding the pipeline and a lot of the data ops issues. And then also another big thing is about everyone is looking for data. I want to have examples of how this data is being used, have example queries. So not just even a data catalog, you want to have a query catalog. Besides the basics, you want to seek out processes of how to correct your data. And then data contracts, they're great. They're similar to things we've done in the past, but they're very useful, especially now that we're going off and doing things just beyond ETL. Whew. Okay.
Yeah.
How did we do? Anything we missed?
Well.
This was this. I will make sure we take the transcript out of that and turn this into like a business glossary 101. Olga, thank you so much.
Yeah, Olga, if you haven't written a book on business glossary, we could just take this and
I'm actually
pretty close.
I create classes. I'm associated with the company called The Learning Curve, and classes are all vendor agnostic, industry agnostic. I am working on a class called Metadata Architecture because we talked about the glossary, but then we touched on the many different other things, and those other things are actually nothing but metadata. And to me, we really have to start treating metadata the same way as we are treating data. So if we have data architecture, we have to have a metadata architecture. So I'm pretty much done with it. It should be out maybe at the end of the year. So no, I haven't written the book, but I'm working on a class.
All right.
I love that.
Well,
folks should follow your materials. I think your courses, I think, are going to be very educational.
They're awesome. Very down to earth and practical. So.
I appreciate this very down to earth and practical. Again, honest, no BS, non-salesy. To wrap up, 3 questions. What's your advice about data, life? Second, who should we invite next? And what resources do you follow?
In terms of advice, I'd say don't put up things that you're thinking, doing. Don't put them up for the next week or whatever. Live in the moment. That's mean if you want to travel somewhere, travel it tomorrow. If you need to implement something at your work, the best time start now. If you wanted to, do general lose weight, exercise more, just right after this podcast, go and start doing it. Literally. And even like if you're unhappy with your job right now, it doesn't matter. It is your job. It's your current job. So start living in the moment. Start living this. That would be probably not my advice, but this is how I try to live my way. In terms of the next guest, you know what? I thought about this question. I don't know, guys. You're doing such a great job about selecting. So, um,
All right,
in-
I'll give you home. Well, I know you've been thinking about it, but we really would appreciate if you continue to think about it and share it online because
yeah.
there's just so many amazing people that we want to reach out. I'll say this: there's all these very well known names, and we're having them. We're so, but I also want to reach out to folks who you may not be knowing, and people a very diverse, a diverse audience. So, uh,
Well, you can reach out to my mentor. So I do have a mentor. I'm very proud of having a mentor. His name is Dave Wells. He is semi-retired, but I think he's still one of the most smartest people ever. I don't know if you know his name or not, but he's not really active on LinkedIn. But I think that would be a person who you probably wanted to invite and talk about absolutely anything data related. So.
and then finally, what resources do you follow?
You know what? I try to be up to date, so I'm listening to tons of podcasts. I literally like I'm cooking and I'm listening or whatever, and those podcasts are not just data related. I mean, I'm a history buff, so I listen a lot about history. I do like Freakonomics, because that's great. I do like Ezra Klein podcasts. I like things like how it made and everything. I don't bind to anything specific. This is it. So,
Well, with that, Olga, thank you so much. This was a beautiful, honest, no BS, non salesy episode. Thank you so
thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.